I want to pick up a point that's been made by other speakers as well, particularly Rahul Kartane, in what I thought was an excellent speech, that today of all days, for us to be debating in this House a fundamental change to electoral law done so glibly by this government on the very day that a constitutional review is announced that has at its cornerstone that changes to the electoral law should be made by consensus. In fact, today, the announced review has been criticised because it's too slow, it's too deliberative, because it's making too much of an attempt to draw a consensus. That is, in fact, a very good thing to do when we're changing electoral law, because the right to vote is a fundamental part of our democracy. Mr. Quinn, look around the walls. Look around the walls at the names of these battles, the names of the places where New Zealanders died defending the right to vote, defending our democracy. Dr. Mapp, that's the very point. The very point is that we defend the right to vote for the people who challenge us the most. It's easy to defend the right to vote for all our friends sitting around here, but defending the right to vote for the people who challenge our community, us and our communities, is actually the greatest challenge of democracy. But today we have a constitutional review announced that puts at the centre consensus about changing fundamental electoral law, and yet we have a bill in front of us today that gives no good reason to change this law. No good reason has been provided by the National Party to change the law. If we're going to change electoral law, Mr. Speaker, we do that deliberately, we do that with thought about the consequences for our democracy. And yet, in this process from the National Party, we have seen almost no argument in favour of the bill. Where has Simon Power been in this debate? Where has the Minister of Justice been in this debate? He has been absent from this debate. Where has Chris Finlayson been in this debate? The contribution we've had from Chris Finlayson, Mr. Speaker, is to tell us that this bill, through his Bill of Rights Act assessment, is wrong. He has said that the change cannot be justified under Section 5 of the Bill of Rights Act. Because the Bill of Rights Act is the very act, Mr. Speaker, that actually provides that every New Zealand citizen who is over the age of 18 years has the right to vote. It's in the Bill of Rights Act. So therefore, when Mr. Finlayson puts his assessment in front of us and he says it cannot be justified, the rights and freedoms contained in the Bill of Rights Act must be subject only to such reasonable limits prescribed by law as can be demonstrably justified in a free and democratic society. That test hasn't been met. In fact, what the Attorney-General says is it's actually completely inconsistent. It does not actually rationally link the disenfranchisement to the aim of the bill. The Attorney-General has been completely clear, Mr. Speaker, in his denunciation of this bill. We even now know, from listening to the ACT Party contribution, that they don't actually support this bill. Hilary Calvert gave us, frankly, a bizarre intervention earlier, but what it really meant was that the ACT Party has been forced to support this bill as part of their coalition deal. They don't really support the bill. They don't really support this bill. The Māori Party have said clearly that they don't support this bill. But the National Party, without a representation from a senior minister, without anyone actually justifying this bill, we are left with Chris Finlayson's statement that fundamentally the right to vote contained in our Bill of Rights Act is being changed here via a private member's bill on the very day a constitutional review is announced that says we should only change the Electoral Act when there's a good reason to do so, and we should only change the Electoral Act when there is a process that actually provides for consensus. But, Mr. Speaker, this has been part of this bill all the way through. The fact is that the Select Committee did not allow the Ministry of Justice to be involved in this process. The fact is that this is a bill about electoral reform that was sent to the Law and Order Committee. The fact is that consistently that committee has failed to go through due process under its chair, Sandra Gowdy, and that is precisely what happened with this bill. But, Mr Speaker, what's been perpetrated here tonight is in fact a hoax on the victims of crime, because there is nothing in this bill, Mr Speaker, that will actually make our communities safer. And that should be the aim of all criminal justice legislation that comes before this House, that we actually are trying to make our communities safer. Not one piece of evidence has been provided by the National Party that this will make our communities safer. And the tragedy tonight, to listen to Paul Quinn run through a series of crimes, one of which I happen to know quite a bit about, Mr Quinn, to have him stand up here tonight and run through those and somehow give the impression that this bill will stop those sorts of crimes, or that this bill will give any comfort to the families and the victims of those crimes. That is appalling, Mr Quinn, because he knows this bill will do nothing in that regard. This bill will not stop people from offending, and it will not give comfort to those victims of crime. It is a hoax on them, Mr Speaker, that has been perpetrated by Mr Quinn here, and by standing here tonight and running through the details of those crimes, he does a disservice to the families and friends of those people affected by those crimes. It is a shameful thing to do, Mr Speaker, to come to this House and pretend that this piece of legislation will do anything for the victims of those crimes, will do anything to make communities safer. Mr Quinn and the National Party know that they need to do far better in this House when it comes to criminal justice. Because if we actually are serious about solving the crimes that Mr Quinn brought up, if he's actually serious about trying to stop those crimes, then that will be about investing in stopping crime before it starts, and making sure that we don't send people to prison. And to have somebody like Howard Broad come out and say, we have far too many people in our prisons, we acknowledge that on this side of the House. We acknowledge that we all need to do better in this House. We all need to do better in terms of addressing the causes of crime. We all need to do better in making sure that we focus more on rehabilitation, that we focus more on reintegration. But this kind of petty, mean-spirited bill will do nothing to reduce crime. It won't make our communities safer, and it's perpetrating a hoax, Mr Speaker, on the victims of crime. We've heard a lot tonight about the view that when prisoners go to prison, we're sending them there for punishment rather than as a punishment. The punishment is the taking away of the liberty. No, Dr Matt, what we have heard consistently from members of the National Party is that people are being sent to prison for punishment. The fact of the matter is they are sent there as a punishment, that their liberty is taken away, and particularly for those people sentenced to crimes of 3 years or less. We know that every single one of those people will be back in our society. So what should our aim be when they go to prison? Our aim should be to rehabilitate and ensure that those people can reintegrate into society, because they will be back with us. They will be our neighbours. We want them to continue to be part of society, and we want to make sure that when they come back into society, they are part of our communities. Mr Quinn's bill tonight does nothing to improve the safety of our communities. It does nothing to uphold our democracy. It is in fact a shame on our democracy. It is simply a hoax. It is simply a slogan that Mr Quinn is putting up in front of this House, and it is a shame that it will be passing through this House tonight.
I call the Honourable Dr.